to Navigating Change, the podcast from Teibel Inc. My name is Pete Wright. That over there is Howard Teibel. Hello, Howard.
Hello, Pete.
I
love saying that. Hello, Pete.
You're getting really good at it.
I do it every
really
time.
trips off
your
your tongue.
Old. Yeah.
Creatures
it's one
of habit.
syllable. It's easy to do.
Thing I want to talk about today, Howard. I see these questions come up on in the media, the higher ed media circuit. How do we fix higher ed? How do we save higher education? We know that there are so many issues about higher ed that things that are not working, that things that we have the sense that are somehow broken. And my question for you is higher ed something that we can save?
The short answer is no. We can't save it. It is going down a path that we need to step outside of trying to figure out how to keep it as it is or preserve it as it is and ask more important questions like, where is it going? How do we better meet the needs of these new students? But not in the context of fixing. See, when I hear the word fix, when people talk about fix, what I think they're really saying is, how can we tweak it, not cause any pain, not do anything that would be too radical, but just put enough in place that we can keep everything as is, but satisfy the fact that there are some other things happening around us. I think people are way underestimating what's coming in the next 5 to 10 years, and in some cases it might even be sooner. The whole MOOCs debate is so interesting because you hear it as people advocating for this is going to disrupt higher education and other people saying it's a fad. You hear very little.
Well, before you're dropping terms here. Go ahead and tell people what a MOOC is.
The massive open online courses. So the for-profits and some that are nonprofit have created these, and I'm sure we've all seen the different examples of these in different domains, where people can sign up for a course taught by an MIT professor for free, something that he delivers to his undergraduate class, becomes available, 50,000 people sign up, and we discover that there's another way to educate people. Now, there are so many good arguments for that it is not yet ready for prime time. That's different from saying there is a wave coming, and there are people who are figuring out how to continuously improve that. So, to me, the debate is not if, the debate is when. And that is also another great analogy that I read in this article. I'll be leading a board retreat, and it's called An Avalanche is Coming. And the wonderful metaphor of an avalanche is that if you look at a mountain from a distance, it looks serene and peaceful, and you can see all the snow. What you don't see is what's happening underneath the surface, 20 or 30 or 50 foot deep. And there is all of this rumbling going on, and there is going to be an avalanche. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and where. And that's what we're dealing with here. And instead of people treating it like that, they're saying, they're debating if it's going to happen or it's not going to happen. Now, what it is also obviously open for debate. But what is not happening enough of is serious debate, not just in the media, but in the institutions, at the board level, at the cabinet level, with the faculty. What do we do about the fact that this is coming? There's still this significant denial about that it is coming, and it's rooted in years and years and years of people making dire predictions about higher ed and it not coming true.
So your contention here is that we're now making dire predictions about higher ed that are coming true. And that's the change. We're in the middle of the boy who cried wolf kind of a situation.
Absolutely. There's a boy that cried wolf, and this is how we deny it. And dire meaning, not dire like it's going to die. What's happening here is there are new delivery systems. There are new ways of thinking about new ways of connecting with students. There is a whole different set of demands that higher ed is still trying to figure out how to get around, which is how students want to learn. It's fascinating. I've been doing work in the K through 12 independent schools. They've been talking forever around flipping the classroom. It is now slowly making its way into higher education. This idea that instead of the 100-person lecture hall, the Harvard model where the expert stands out in front and everybody takes notes, that the time when we're together is going to be when we're going to collaborate, and the learning happens offline. The technology is absolutely making that available. Now, there are things to work out, like how do you motivate an 18, 19-year-old to, in their own dorm room, do the learning as opposed to being forced to sit through a lecture. But the truth is, more and more of these lectures are being taped anyways, and this is how students are getting them. So
I don't know if you.
the
I mean,
opportunity is.
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
you go.
I just feel like it's important to add that so many of these discussions about whether or not we're going to fix higher ed or save higher ed or fix the learning model is rooted in our own experience of when we were last comfortable in the business, right? In the delivery of education, right? The implication of saying we want to fix something or save it is we need to take something we perceive as broken and we want to take it back to a state when it was something that was, by our own definition, unbroken. And so when you mention an 18-year or 19-year-old who's sitting in a giant lecture hall, it's easy for me to think back to being an 18 or 19-year-old sitting in a giant lecture hall, but that is not. I would say the experience, as you say, of that lecture hall is not the same experience of today's 18 or 19-year-old. And there are progressive faculty that are out doing things differently and not focused on this idea of trying to recreate some magic that we had 20 to 30 years ago, but to celebrate what we have now, and that maybe fixing is not so much the word, but does higher ed need recreating?
That's great.
I don't know. I may be
powerful conversation. No, that was excellent. A powerful conversation there is to have here for institutions internally, for leaders in these institutions, are what traditions are worth preserving in terms of moving forward. See, I think what we do is we feel threatened by tradition being impinged upon. That somehow, if we give into this change, we're going to lose some of the core traditional models of what higher ed has offered. And I think that a more relevant, appropriate conversation is, let's recognize tradition is important. What are those traditions we want to retain? And what are those things that are going to speak to our core audience of the future? Not just the audience of today, but the audience for 5 years from now, because I'll tell you something, it's going to take multiple years for institutions to rework their academic curriculum and program to accommodate this future generation. And if they don't start working on it now, they're going to find themselves playing serious catch-up when there's an emergency, because they are losing ground on, for example, being able to demonstrate outcomes from these kinds of programs, or students hearing more sort of publicly how certain institutions have reworked their curriculum, and the engagement at that level, at that institution, is profoundly different than the traditional models of the schools who are still sitting with the old model. Now, what's interesting is there are people that say there's some schools that don't need to care. There's some schools like, the prestige schools like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Stanford, they don't have to care. I disagree. I think those schools are probably experimenting with this even more powerfully. All of this MOOC stuff is being generated at the prestige level, and these schools understand that they're experimenting. They're not changing the model right now. What they're doing is they're seeing how to make it work. The rest of the schools who are the middle tier, very high-priced liberal arts schools, they're in a position to say, all right, do we find ourselves willing to experiment with this, not decide what we're going to do, but be part of the conversation sufficiently so that we don't find ourselves not engaging the faculty. It starts, Pete, with there needs to be a willingness to engage and have this kind of conversation with the different stakeholders together in the room. And that's one of the things that I'm looking to do more and more of, in finding ways of bringing faculty and administrators, trustees together. And I'm going to be leading a board retreat where that's going to happen, where it's actually going to involve faculty, administrators, and the board in a conversation about is our mission and how we're thinking about our mission, do we need to step back and go, in what way do we need to change, given the realities of the price sensitivity, our inability to raise tuition anymore, the high discount rates? There is very little room, and I don't think there's anybody arguing at this point that we're going to go back to a point where we can go back to 5 to 8% tuition increases, and there are no other financial levers unless you get incredible philanthropy, to save the day. So there is a reality that's here right now, and I think that anybody sitting in, we're going to go back to the days where we can continue to subsidize programs that are not being utilized, although they'd be a wonderful thing to offer here, or certain kinds of athletic programs that nobody's doing but maybe two board members put in place 20 years ago, and now we have it and we keep losing money. Those kinds of conversations are the ones that are very difficult to have but need to start happening, and it's a leadership conversation. Presidents need to get in there and say, we're going to have these tough conversations. And that's the work that we're in the middle of right now. It's very exciting.
Oh, it's very powerful, just getting people to ask that question and realize that, if you turn the tables, in some cases, those conversations become easier. Conversations about, big endowments in sports and athletics and tenure versus pay for performance and, facilities and growth versus online investment and, MOOCs.
Exactly.
Those questions become easier when you're not trying to repair something that is perceived as broken. But create something.
That's right. It's about where do we want to go?
Yeah.
That's great, Pete.
Love it. Great conversation, Howard. Thank you so much for your time, as always. You can find us.
Couldn't do it without you. You know that, Pete. No. You are the question king.
Well,
you know how to ask a question better than anybody I know.
Oh, you try stuff. That's all I'm saying.
I do too.
You can find us at teibelinc.com, and you can also find us, we should say this more often, you can find us on Twitter at Howard Teibel, or you can reach out to me at Pete Wright if there are questions you think that we ought to be talking about on this podcast. We would sure love your input, so thank you so much for reaching out, for lending us your ears. Subscribe to the show in iTunes or Stitcher Smart Radio, and until next week, we'll catch you on Navigating Change, the podcast from Teibel Inc.